All right, let's dive into a story that starts with a pretty shocking discovery in a remote mountain cabin. And believe me, it ends with one of the biggest questions you could possibly ask about what it means to be human. It's a philosophical mystery, but it's wrapped up in a science fiction story, and it all revolves around one very, very strange manuscript.
And this is it. This is the document at the heart of the whole mystery. Homo tellurus, the conscious cosmic caddis fly. It was found right next to the remains of the person who wrote it, and this manuscript tells a wild tale of immortal visitors from another planet. But really, it's a tale that's going to force us all to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about our own lives.
So you're probably wondering, how on earth did this manuscript end up in a place like this? Well, our story kicks off with the narrator making a kind of pilgrimage. He's returning after 50 long years to this desolate, oversized cabin way out in the West Norwegian mountains, a place he remembered from his childhood.
And you really have to get a feel for this place because the atmosphere is just so key to the story. The narrator describes it as eerie, uncanny, incantational, even ominous. The lake looked like cold, discouraging steel, and the air was just thick with this profound silence. He knew right away that something was wrong. So he goes into the villa, and his footsteps are just echoing in the total silence. He flicks on the lights in an upstairs bedroom and is met with a truly harrowing sight. Sitting upright in a chair with his head tilted back is the body of a man, and he's been dead for almost half a year. And this quote just perfectly captures the twin discoveries, because it wasn't just the body of this man, Hilary Finlay von Haberman. Nope. Right there on the desk in front of him lay something else entirely. A thick stack of papers. His literary remains. The title on this thing, written in this finicky Gothic calligraphy, was incredibly long. But it basically promised the confessions of a man who, after making contact with beings from another planet, had come to see human existence not as some grand adventure, but as a tragic cosmic mistake. The mystery of why von Haberman was even here, well, that was about to be explained. Our narrator, who's a philosopher himself, stays up the entire night, just completely engrossed in this manuscript. And the story he reads is unlike anything he could have possibly imagined. So here's the gist of it. According to the manuscript, von Haberman was visited by these immortal beings called Zeteticans. Think of them as cosmic ethnologists who'd been watching humanity for ages. But now that we were starting to understand our own evolution, they had a question. There was one thing about us they just could not wrap their heads around. And there it is. That's the central question that drives everything that follows. How do we, knowing full well we have such a short time here, manage to live as if it's forever? And then, how do we just accept death when our time is up? Coming from an immortal's perspective, it's a question that cuts right to the very core of the human condition. So the manuscript and the philosopher Herman Tennessen, who wrote this whole story, uses this sci-fi premise to actually answer the Zeteticans' question. And to understand how we live with the knowledge of our own death, well, we have to look at the elaborate games we play with ourselves. Here is the key metaphor. Humanity is on a spaceship flying through a vast, vile void. But what are we doing? We get completely absorbed in our daily chores. We polish the brass railings, we play bridge, we make small talk. We do literally anything to avoid looking out the window and facing the terrifying reality of where we actually are. Tennyson actually gives this a name, suification. It comes from the Latin word for swine, and it's this process of making ourselves into happy pigs. We use work, routine, and social norms as what he calls ontological hebitants, which is just a really fancy way of saying we use them as tools to dull our awareness of our own mortality and the sheer absurdity of our cosmic situation. So to even begin to grapple with this, Tennyson says we need a totally different kind of philosophy. Not what he calls brain or eye philosophy. You know, the detached, objective kind, like a scientist observing a chemical reaction. No, he says we need heart philosophy, an approach that's emotionally engaged, that gets its hands dirty, and that actually confronts the messiness of being alive. To get the difference, think about the story he tells about a Russian spy who was caught during the Finnish-Russian War. He knows with absolute certainty that he's going to be executed at dawn. But in court, he's totally stoic, because for him, the whole thing is just a bureaucratic formality. But the moment the judge actually says the words, the moment the sentence is pronounced, he completely breaks down.
What happened? He already knew the outcome, right? The key here is that his knowledge changed. This is what Tennyson calls integrated knowledge. It's the difference between knowing a fact in your head, like all men are mortal, and the kind of knowledge that Spy gets the second he hears that sentence. It's a truth that hits you in your bones and marrow. Most of us know we're going to die, but very, very few of us have an integrated knowledge of it.
So, once we get even a glimpse of this deeper, more terrifying knowledge, we're faced with a choice, and it's a choice that will define the rest of our lives. We can either retreat back into polishing the brass, or we can face it head on.
And here are the two paths. You have the inauthentic life. That's the life of superfication, right? It's the comfortable self-deception of the happy pig. Then you have the authentic life, which means living with a crystal clear awareness of how absurd life is. It's a difficult path, for sure, and it means choosing dignity over happiness. And that's the real cost. Choosing authenticity, choosing to truly know our condition, it means giving up on the usual goals of happiness and peace of mind. It forces you to ask yourself, what do you value more, truth or comfort? Now, I know this all sounds incredibly bleak. If we face the truth, we lose happiness. If we don't, we live a lie. It feels like a trap. But just as we're about to land on this deeply pessimistic conclusion, Tennyson introduces one final, absolutely stunning twist. First, he presents the conclusion from another philosopher, Peter Wessel Zapffe, and Zapfe's take was stark. He argued that humanity is basically a biological paradox, an animal that got over-endowed with insight. So his dignified response? We should all just stop having kids and let our species die out gracefully. But Tennyson rejects this. He suggests a completely different way of looking at it. What if our consciousness isn't some tragic mistake? Without us, he argues, the universe is just a predictable machine, but with us, anything is possible. What if we are its sole principle of uncertainty? Maybe our purpose isn't to find an answer, but to be the question mark. Which brings us right back to the spaceship. We know the stakes now. We can live with an integrated knowledge of that vast, indifferent void outside, or we can lose ourselves in the routines of the ship. The brass is there, waiting to be polished. The cards are being dealt. The next time you find yourself reaching for a distraction, just ask yourself, are you polishing the brass or are you looking out the window?